Assassin's Creed 2 is the second game in the Assassin's Creed series. While that may seem obvious, just remember that Star Wars started with Episode 4, and some people like to pretend that Assassin's Creed started with number 2. It didn't, and you shouldn't think that. The first game is pretty good, and I go into detail about that in my previous video, so go watch that first because it's going to be referenced here. Assassin's Creed 1 did a great job of introducing us to this alternate universe of assassins and Templars, ancient civilizations, and beds which let you relive the memories of your ancestor. Apparently you can also control your ancestor and do the wrong thing, which desynchronizes your mind from the memory, which technically means you're controlling your ancestor through time, but I don't think they thought that bit through, so shut up and just move on. Picking up pretty much exactly where the last game left off, we're back with Desmond in his cell at Abstergo, staring at some weird symbols on his cell wall. Lucy comes in to break him out of the facility and smuggles him to an assassin hideout. One of the biggest complaints about the last game was the regular interruption of the historical gameplay. You'd kill a few targets and then be pulled out of the machine to have some more exposition spouted at you. There is an in-game reason for this. It's to prevent something called the bleeding effect, which is suggested to have led to Subject 16 ended up dead. This time, however, the bleeding effect is the aim of the game. During their escape, Lucy grabs some Animus data to allow Desmond to use the assassin's own Animus to relive the memories of his ancestor Ezio Auditore di Firenze. The idea being that if Desmond lives Ezio's life, his skills and abilities will bleed through to Desmond, providing him with years of assassin's training in a matter of days. In gameplay terms, this means that there are literally only 3 sections of the game where you experience the modern day stuff. We are introduced to Rebecca and Sean, 2 other members of the Order of Assassins. Rebecca is the tech girl who runs the Animus, and Sean is a twat.
What's all this stuff for?
This stuff, Desmond. Oh, this stuff is nothing special, really, this stuff. It's just the stuff that keeps our entire operation from falling apart, really. It requires a great deal of concentration to keep it all moving, so you'll forgive me if I don't have time to play meet and greet.
Back inside the Animus, we first encounter Ezio as he emerges from his mother's womb, and then again when he's a teenager. The rest of the game plays out over the next 10 years of his life, something I didn't realise on my first playthrough until near the end where Ezio says as much.
10 years hunting the man responsible.
The game does regularly tell you what the current year is, but by that point I'd forgotten what year it was before. I think I'm correct in saying that Ezio is the second eldest of 4 siblings in a powerful family living in Florence in the late 1400s. His life generally seems to involve picking fights, shagging women, and climbing buildings with his brother. Fairly soon, his father and 2 brothers are betrayed and hung, leaving Ezio to help his mother and sister escape the city to safety. Before he died, his father gave Ezio the location of a secret room containing an assassin outfit, which Ezio immediately puts on and wears for the next 10 years. He swears revenge on the men who betrayed his family and sets out killing those involved, each time finding out that these men are all connected to some bigger conspiracy. I think the first Assassin's Creed could be fairly summed up as a prototype to be engineered and worked into something finer. Assassin's Creed 2 could almost be used as the textbook definition of a proper sequel. Were you sick of the modern day stuff? It's almost all gone here. Was the last game too serious for you? Have some knob jokes.
Your sister seemed quite satisfied with the handling I gave her earlier. May I come in?
Fine, but only for a minute.
A minute is all I need.
Indeed.
You should find an outlet.
I have plenty of outlets.
I meant besides vaginas.
Not enough side missions for you? Have a cluttered map that will become an industry standard for the next several years. There is so much new stuff to discuss here that honestly it's difficult to know where to begin, but I think that almost all of it has been added for the better, and clearly many other people agreed too, because the features added here stuck around for the next several games. But I think almost all of these positive changes can be linked back to one key addition: currency. The last game didn't have currency. You didn't need it. You were given everything you needed in that game. There was a linear progression path for health and weapons, and your time was spent learning about and then murdering your targets. Here though, there's a bit more to do in this vast open world. At the very basic level, you can buy armor upgrades. Whether it's fancy metal boots or dashing leather spolders, these increase your maximum health by varying amounts. Your health doesn't regenerate anymore, so you'll need to visit the doctor every so often to buy medicine if you want to get stuck into some longer fights. If you're feeling flashy, this is Renaissance Italy after all, you can buy new dyes for your clothing too. Early on in the game, your uncle puts you in charge of his villa and the surrounding village. Here you can invest in new shops and services which provide you with a discount and generate income from passing visitors. Those annoying beggars from the last game have been replaced with even more annoying minstrels, but these can be appeased by throwing money at them. If you feel like you could be killing people more efficiently, you can purchase new weapons, including the new smoke bombs, as well as topping up your stash of throwing knives. Oh, and you'll need to treat yourself to some new pouches if you want to increase your carry capacity. Do you remember Subject 16 being mentioned at all in the last game? Well, it turns out that somehow he has managed to hack into your ancestors' memories and has altered the world in an attempt to expose what he calls the truth. In gameplay, this means searching specific buildings with your eagle vision to find a glowing glyph, and these are the same glyphs you saw scrawled on your cell wall at the end of the last game. Once you approach them, you unlock a minigame, which range from finding the commonalities in paintings to solving riddles and ciphers. Completing these unlocks part of a video called The Truth, which turns out to seemingly be one of his memories, and appears to be a man and a woman stealing an apple of Eden during the time of the first civilization. It doesn't really add anything to what you may have already learned by this point, but at the time this came out, there were weird people like me who were drooling for any extra snippet of information on the precursor race. There are some additions to this game that seem to be so obviously missing from the last game in hindsight, just none of us realised at the time. You can swing around corners on hanging baskets, you can assassinate people from above like Batman with a bloodlust, you can hire groups of mercenaries, thieves and courtesans to distract guards. That hidden blade was pretty cool, right? Well, two of a good thing is always better, right? Right? Right at the start of the game, you meet famous inventor turned Ninja Turtle Leonardo da Vinci. On top of being just an all-around smashing chap, he'll also decipher a certain collectible for you to unlock new gadgets. It's thanks to him that we get a gun strapped to your wrist and the ability to load your blades with poison vials. There's even a mission later on where you convince him to let you use his flying device. All of these things combine to create a parkour system that more regularly feels more cinematic and exciting, and a combat system that gives you more options and keeps things interesting. This game swaps the copy-paste structure of the previous game for Ezio's personal story, which allows for the missions to be much more diverse, with narrative set pieces and unique mechanics. This game marks the introduction of tailing missions to the series, as well as the occasional insta-fail stealth missions. I can't speak for the new style games, but from what I've seen, this series never got around to introducing proper stealth mechanics, despite having such a focus on stealth gameplay. A crouch button would have been nice, or the ability to hide in hedges, or even just a brief window between being spotted and the guards calling for help. The combat additions introduced here allow you to mix up your approach to group fights, and sometimes they outright prevent you from using the same tactics over and over again. Many people have suggested that the previous game's combat was too reliant on using counterattacks. In Assassin's Creed 2, they've introduced a heavy enemy type, who as far as I can tell cannot be countered, with the best method of dispatching them to be to disarm them and use their own weapons against them. Oh yeah, you can steal weapons from enemies now, so you can now play with pikes, hammers and heavy axes. You won't be able to keep the heavier weapons though, and they're only good for a couple of kills. They do have some glorious kill animations though. You could also drop a smoke bomb, Dr. Krieger style, and quickly run around stabbing the guards while they cough their guts out. Or you can use that same distraction to run away and head for a hiding spot. Hiding spots have been improved too. Those groups for hire I mentioned earlier can be set on guards to lead them away, or you can just stand amongst them to blend in, like any other heavily armed hooded figure stood amongst a group of ladies of the night. You can also walk amongst a group of pedestrians, becoming just another incredibly well-dressed commoner on their way to the shops. In objective terms, there aren't really many additions to hiding spots, with only hiding in crowds and underwater, oh yeah, you can swim now, being introduced here. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that hiding in crowds of pedestrians is one of the most important additions to this series. It seems like such an obvious idea that I forgot it wasn't in the original when I went back to it. Mobile hiding spots that you can use to actually achieve some stealth assassinations. You can also assassinate from cover now, whether that means dragging guards in bales of hay, swapping seats with them on a bench, or pulling them off a ledge you're dangling from. The improved free running gets a chance to really show off here in the new assassin tombs. These optional challenge room hide seals which can be used to unlock the best armor set in the game, and they are pure parkour challenges. If I were feeling more generous, I'd call them puzzles, but the camera shows you the exact route you need to take, but you may still be under a time limit to reach your objective. This game also introduces scripted chases, in that you chase a target through a predetermined route as doors shut in front of you and walls collapse to block your way. Again, not really a challenge as such, but it can make you feel like a parkouring Terminator when you get in a good flow state with it. All of this comes together to make a far superior game in almost all metrics. I try to avoid objective arguments when it comes to discussing subjective things like video games, but in terms of mechanics and gameplay, I don't really think anyone could honestly argue that the former game is better than this. If you were talking about the story though, you might have something. I do prefer the story here, being a personal story we can get invested or at least interested in. The problem is that it's told badly, in my opinion. Most of the time I had no idea who I was trying to kill or why. The game's key events take place over 10 years, but you won't realise that unless you actively take notes of the years when they display them briefly once every so often, or until Ezio outright states this near the end of the game. When you do start taking notes, like I did for this playthrough, I found myself wondering what had happened in the 2 years we just skipped, because nothing in the game world changes during these time jumps. Once again, I feel I need to stress the point that most of the time I had no idea who I was killing or why, and that seems like just a fundamental failure of the storytelling. It starts off with you killing the chap directly responsible for betraying your family. Fine, I'm with you there. But then you go after his associates and kill all of them. You come to realise that one of those responsible, Rodrigo Borgia, is seemingly in a high-ranking position and has lots of underlings who are manipulating events across Italy. Ezio then goes off to kill them to try and get closer to Mr. Borgia himself. Ezio is given his father's assassin gear just before he dies, but he knows nothing about the Order or the Templars until his uncle Mario tells him shortly after. This seemingly isn't mentioned again until very late in the game, and I had to regularly question myself as to whether I know that these targets are Templars yet, as Ezio seemingly just starts joining rebellions to assassinate people he's just found out about. It turns out that all the friends you've made along the way, that being your uncle, a Florentine madam, a load of thieves and a mercenary, are all members of the Order of Assassins, and they've been guiding your way and training you in their methods over the last 10 years. This does seem like pretty standard fare on the surface, but give it a moment to think about this group of people manipulating a young man into keeping his anger burning for 10 years while he kills people you also need dead. In the original release, you only officially become an assassin immediately before the final mission, which seems insane, especially as you've been wearing their clobber, using their weapons and deciphering their Codex pages for the last decade. Which brings me to an interesting design choice that could create an emotionally difficult grind for people looking to see this story through to the end. Scattered around the world are Codex pages, gradually revealed on your map and located in little rooms always guarded by 4 guards. Their locations are revealed by using those good old Ubisoft towers, and you can collect them at any time. Whenever you get a chance, you can take them to Da Vinci to decipher them, and they can then be added to a board back at your villa. You also get a health increase for every 4 of these that you decipher. What the game doesn't tell you is that you need to have gathered all of these to unlock the final mission. You are told this immediately prior to the final mission, and you are then given a map which reveals all of their locations. But if you haven't been picking these up as you play through the rest of the game, you could have up to 16 identical scenarios to go and complete. Luckily, this game introduced a fast travel system to get around the various maps, but unfortunately, once you're in a city, you're on your own. Like the Combine, once you're in that place, you're reliant on local transportation, and in this instance, that's your feet. This ties into the DLC, which is included as if it was part of the base game in the Steam version I bought. 2 new memory sequences were sold separately after the game's release, sequence 12 and 13. Apparently these were originally intended to be part of the main game, but were cut due to time constraints. You get to spend a bit more time in Forlì, which is a part of the game you would otherwise spend all of 15 minutes in. The other part of the DLC sees you return to Florence, which really would have been welcome in the main game, as the city feels like it's forgotten about around a third of the way into the game, with the bulk of the story taking place in Venice. This sequence sees you tracking down a monk who has stolen the Apple of Eden, and now has the city's populace under his control. Ezio is tasked with eliminating his 9 lieutenants across the city to break the people free from their control. With each lieutenant killed, we see the citizens being liberated and marching through the streets to rebel against this mad monk ruling over them. What I think we've got here is possibly the first example of liberating camps across a map, or at least a very early version of it. This will be greatly expanded upon in the next game, but by eliminating these targets you slowly loosen the bad guy's grip on the city, allowing you to bring him down in an uprising. Sounds like almost every open world game for the past decade, right? This DLC also, weirdly, adds a new traversal mechanic, the springboard. This is the second to last memory in the game, with the final one being very linear, and these boards only seem to be in one area of the map. I expected them to feature in Brotherhood, but unless I'm completely blind, this does not seem to be the case. Very weird. Finally, this game gives us some fairly straightforward information about the first civilization. At the end of the game, Ezio encounters a projection of a being named Minerva. She answers Ezio's question, but keeps looking directly at the camera to speak, basically telling Ezio to shut up because she's talking directly to Desmond, who she calls by name. She tells him that her race created humans as a workforce, but they eventually rose up and rebelled. During this uprising, a solar flare caused massive damage to the Earth, wiping out most of both races. Both humans and the precursor race worked together to rebuild society and to construct hidden temples that could protect them from a similar event. Minerva tasks Desmond with finding these temples, and hints that another cataclysmic solar flare is due soon. With this game being released in late 2010, I have a feeling that this was all hinting towards that prediction of the world ending in 2012, and I did really appreciate that little connection at the time. That element is kind of lost now, but it's still a good enough motivation for the modern day story, which is still keeping and even adding plenty of mystery about those who came before. As I record this, I can't remember how they managed to see into the future to know about Desmond and the Animus, but we'll explore that when we eventually get there. And that, at long last, is Assassin's Creed 2, arguably the most popular game in the franchise, and honestly, it's not difficult to see why. It really does seem like they looked at what people liked and disliked about the first game and made adjustments to suit. It's got better parkour, better combat, memorable characters and funny moments, plenty of things to keep you occupied, and some English twat who is seemingly channeling Simon Cowell for some reason. Personally, I think it's only the clarity of the story holding this game back. It would have been nice to know why I am helping these random people or why I'm suddenly after this particular gang of ne'er-do-wells, and I think Ezio should have been brought into the Assassin Order much earlier. I kind of get why they didn't do that, but in a game called Assassin's Creed, where we the players all know about the Assassins and the Templars, it seemed odd to have a character who is oblivious to most of that stuff right up until the end of the game. Which brings us to my lovely chart ranking the series. So far, we only have one game to compare this to, and there are no prices for correctly guessing that I will be putting this game higher up than the first. The only argument I could feasibly make to change this would be that the first game is more pure, but that sounds so pretentious that I think I need to go and be sick. I'm streaming my playthrough of the series over on Twitch Monday to Thursday, so come check me out and talk down to me and berate my opinions in real time.